In the early morning darkness of August 7, 1942, the sea off the northern coast of Guadalcanal rolled beneath a long line of transports and escorting warships. Engines vibrated through steel hulls while landing craft were lowered into the water and guided into position along the sides of the troopships. Dense jungle pressed against the shoreline beyond the surf, forming a dark wall behind the narrow beaches where American forces prepared to land. Inside the small boats waiting in the water, Marines sat shoulder to shoulder among rifles, ammunition crates, and field radios while officers checked watches against the timetable for the assault. The convoy had crossed the final stretch of ocean during the night, approaching the Solomon Islands beneath scattered rain squalls that concealed the ships from distant observation. Lookouts scanned the horizon while radar operators studied faint contacts drifting across their screens. The vessels carried the first major Allied offensive force of the Pacific War, assembled under orders approved by Admiral Chester Nimitz at Pearl Harbor after weeks of hurried planning and uncertain intelligence. Japanese construction crews had begun building an airfield on Guadalcanal earlier that summer. Reconnaissance photographs revealed a runway nearing completion along the island's northern coast. Once operational, the airfield would allow Japanese aircraft to threaten the sea lanes linking the United States with Australia. Intelligence estimates suggested the work might be finished within weeks. Allowing the base to become operational would place Allied shipping under constant threat. The decision to strike therefore emerged from a calculation shaped by limited information and tightening timelines. American naval forces in the Pacific remained stretched after months of fighting, yet delaying the attack promised stronger Japanese defenses. Capturing the airfield before it became operational became the central objective of Operation Watchtower, the amphibious assault now approaching Guadalcanal. Among the Marines waiting for the signal to launch the landing craft, the destination had remained uncertain for much of the voyage. Letters written aboard the transports carried fragments of rumor rather than confirmed information about the coming battle.
We are headed somewhere in the Pacific, and nobody knows exactly where. Rumor says the Japanese are waiting for us. Private First Class Eugene Sledge, U.S. Marine Corps.
The landing force belonged to the 1st Marine Division under the command of Alexander Vandegrift, whose units had trained extensively for amphibious operations, but had not yet fought a major engagement against Japanese forces. The transports carried thousands of Marines together with artillery, engineering equipment, aviation fuel, and construction machinery needed to complete the captured airfield. Even under ideal conditions, unloading this cargo would require several days. Shortly after sunrise on August 7, 1942, the stillness over Guadalcanal ended as Allied cruisers opened fire toward the shoreline. Heavy shells struck the jungle along the coast, sending columns of smoke above the trees where Japanese construction camps had stood only hours earlier. Destroyers moved closer to the beach, sweeping suspected defensive positions with smaller caliber guns. Within minutes, the landing craft engines surged forward as the first wave of Marines moved toward the shore. The boats crossed the final stretch of water under covering fire from the ships behind them. Officers standing at the bows studied the coastline through binoculars while the Marines crouched low against the metal hulls. Intelligence briefings had described Guadalcanal as lightly defended, yet aerial reconnaissance had revealed little about the number of Japanese troops stationed inland. The jungle concealed both terrain and defenders. The first landing craft grounded shortly after mid-morning. Marines stepped into the shallow surf and formed quick lines across the beach before advancing inland through tangled vegetation. Instead of encountering organized defensive fire, the first patrols discovered abandoned camps and scattered construction equipment left behind by Japanese engineers. Bulldozers stood beside the long strip of coral and compacted earth that marked the unfinished runway. Fuel drums and supply crates remained stacked along the clearing where work crews had been extending the airstrip. Japanese personnel stationed near the site had withdrawn shortly before the bombardment began, moving inland to regroup and report the invasion. Enemy forces have landed on Guadalcanal in strength. Imperial Japanese Navy signal traffic, Rabaul headquarters. Within hours, Marines secured the perimeter surrounding the airstrip while reconnaissance patrols pushed cautiously into the jungle. Engineers moved forward to examine the runway surface and drainage channels. The captured airfield, previously known to the Japanese as Lunga Point, would soon receive a new name, Henderson Field, honoring a Marine aviator killed earlier that summer during the Battle of Midway. Despite the rapid success of the landing, the quiet conditions across the clearing created an uneasy atmosphere among the Marines establishing defensive positions. Patrols reported little contact with Japanese forces, yet signs of recent activity remained visible throughout the abandoned camps.
We landed without opposition, but we had the uneasy feeling the enemy was somewhere in the jungle watching us. Major General Alexander Vandegrift, Commanding General, 1st Marine Division.
Throughout the afternoon, the transports anchored offshore continued lowering supplies into waiting landing craft. Each boat carried ammunition, food, engineering equipment, and aviation fuel toward the beach while sailors worked the cargo nets suspended above the water. The Marines ashore required enormous quantities of material to hold their position on the island. Completing Henderson Field alone demanded heavy machinery, fuel storage tanks, and spare aircraft parts. The unloading process quickly revealed the fragile logistics supporting the operation. Every crate had to move through small landing craft shuttling back and forth between ship and shore. Rough seas, mechanical failure, or enemy attack could disrupt the entire system within minutes. Yet without those supplies, the Marines on Guadalcanal would remain isolated on a narrow strip of coastline surrounded by jungle and uncertain enemy strength. Far to the north, Japanese commanders at Rabaul began organizing their response to the unexpected landing. Aircraft were prepared for long-range strikes against the Allied fleet, while naval officers assembled available cruisers and destroyers capable of moving south through the Solomon Islands. By early afternoon on August 7th, radar operators aboard the Allied screening ships detected incoming aircraft approaching the anchorage. Japanese bombers from Rabaul had launched a retaliatory strike across hundreds of miles of open ocean before descending toward the cluster of transports off Guadalcanal. Anti-aircraft guns erupted across the fleet as carrier fighters moved to intercept the attackers. Bombs fell among the ships anchored offshore, sending columns of water rising above the transports. One vessel took a damaging hit, while other explosions landed harmlessly in the sea. The bombers soon turned northward after releasing their ordnance, leaving behind scattered damage, but confirming that Japanese air power had begun reacting to the invasion. The strike reinforced growing concern among the American naval commanders responsible for protecting the landing force. Aircraft from the supporting carriers had already flown multiple patrols during the day, consuming fuel and reducing the number of fighters available for defense. Japanese land-based airfields remained capable of launching additional attacks as long as the fleet remained within range. Inside the jungle near Henderson Field, Marines continued establishing defensive positions while engineers surveyed the airstrip. The quiet conditions along the perimeter did little to ease the tension felt by troops who knew Japanese forces remained somewhere beyond the tree line. One Marine later recorded the atmosphere surrounding the captured airfield in his personal journal.
The jungle presses close around the airfield. At night, it feels as if the island itself is moving. Corporal Robert Leckie, U.S. Marine Corps.
As evening approached on August 7th, unloading operations continued under increasing pressure. Cargo nets swung steadily between ship and sea while landing craft delivered artillery pieces, trucks, and engineering equipment to the beaches. Marine officers ashore pressed urgently for more aviation fuel and construction machinery, knowing that Henderson Field had to become operational as quickly as possible. Aircraft based on the island would eventually provide the defensive umbrella needed to protect both the Marines and the surrounding waters. At the same time, discussions intensified among the senior naval officers commanding the Allied fleet. Reports from the carriers indicated rising aircraft losses and declining fuel reserves. Intelligence remained uncertain about the location of Japanese carrier forces that might appear in the region without warning. While those deliberations unfolded aboard the Allied ships, a Japanese cruiser force had already departed Rabaul under the command of Gunichi Mikawa. His squadron moved south through the Solomon Islands under cover of darkness, using narrow channels and limited Allied reconnaissance to approach Guadalcanal undetected. The ships carried experienced crews trained extensively for nighttime combat, supported by powerful torpedoes capable of crippling heavy warships with a single strike. Staff officers aboard Mikawa's flagship later described the determination with which the Japanese commander prepared for the coming engagement.
The transports must be destroyed tonight. Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa, Imperial Japanese Navy.
Night descended quickly across the Solomon Islands. Allied cruisers and destroyers moved into screening positions along the approaches to Guadalcanal, while the transports continued unloading supplies for the Marines ashore. Beyond the northern horizon, Mikawa's cruisers closed steadily toward the Allied fleet guarding the landing area. Engines drove the warships through the darkness while lookouts searched for silhouettes against the faint glow of the night sky. Within the narrow channel separating the islands, the Allied screening force maintained its patrol lines. The two fleets were now approaching the same stretch of water. If you've liked this content, consider subscribing and liking this video. Comment down below on your thoughts or what you'd like to see next.